Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. The PlayStation 2, PS2, was released by Sony in March 2000 and continued to be produced till 2013, making it one of the most durable consoles ever. It was the much-awaited successor to the phenomenally popular original PlayStation, the PS1. At this point in the 2000s, history proved that video games were not going to be a generational fad, but a long-term human hobby. Hence, investment in the industry increased, as did the competition, and this resulted in the creation of many beautiful games, some of which have been likened to pieces of art. There have been 4,000 games produced for the PS2, of which we list the top 100 here. Grand Theft Auto: San Andreas, 2004. Grand Theft Auto: San Andreas is an open-world action-adventure game widely regarded as one of the best games ever made. It takes place in a fictional city in America named San Andreas, where the lead character Carl Johnson gets sucked back into a former life of crime, all the while dealing with gangs and cops. The game makes several references to real-life events and portrays some of them to a good amount of detail. The gameplay mechanics made popular by its predecessor GTA Vice City were expanded upon and further refined. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas received overwhelming critical acclaim and commercial success. It received record scores on almost all gaming review platforms where the game's design, storyline, and open-endedness received particular praise. The only criticism stemmed from lack of refinement in some visual areas and a controversial user-created mod of the game. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is the best-selling PS2 game of all time, having sold almost 18 million units. A virtual reality VR version of the game is currently being developed for the platform Oculus Quest 2. Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater, 2004. Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater is a stealth genre game that's set as a prequel to the original Metal Gear game. The backdrop of the game is in a jungle in Russia during the Cold War of the 1960s. The story centers on the character Naked Snake as he tries to rescue an important Russian rocket scientist, as well as defeat his former mentor in order to save the world from the consequences of a nuclear weapon. The modus operandi of the game is to use stealth and camouflage in order to complete missions in the jungle and unravel the complicated story. There's a lot of refinement over the original gameplay, including a camouflage indicator, injuries and the need to treat them, as well as the need to keep eating food in order to sustain the stamina bar. Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater received wide critical acclaim and was a commercial success as well. The game sold over 4 million copies. It also received a lot of industry awards. The stealth aspect of the game received a lot of praise in its implementation. Gamers and critics both took a liking to the jungle setting. The cinematics of the game also received a lot of commendation. The chief criticism was based on lack of believability of some portions of the gameplay, like the camouflage system for example. An expanded version called Metal Gear Solid 3: Subsistence was released in 2005, as well as an HD remake in 2012. God of War, 2005. God of War is an action battle game that's set in ancient Greece, with the central theme of the game being based on myths and legends from popular Greek mythology. The central character is a Spartan warrior named Kratos, whom the Greek god of war, Ares, tricks into murdering his own wife and daughter. The story of the game is based on Kratos' revenge against Ares, with the help of the goddess Athena and the mystical weapon Pandora's box. The fighting aspect of the gameplay is dependent on combination moves of Kratos' primary and secondary weapons, as well as the use of some magic. God of War received universal acclaim and sold very well. The fighting mechanics and cinematics of the game were very widely praised, especially the boss fights. God of War sold over 4.5 million copies worldwide and is considered the best fighting game on the PS2 platform, testing the hardware to its maximum limits. The only major criticism was based on camera angles during gameplay. The success of this game established its franchise and led to multiple sequels and an adapted novel. A live-action film was commissioned, but ultimately cancelled, although a TV series is still in the question.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
Silent Hill 2, 2001. Silent Hill 2 is a survival horror game that's based on the story of a widowed man finding a letter from his deceased wife to come and find her in a town that's named Silent Hill. The game chronicles the story of this man, James Sunderland, and his journey through this town of Silent Hill, fighting monsters as well as solving puzzles and riddles. There's also a deep exploration of various serious themes like death, depression, and mental illness, amongst others. In fact, some of the monsters in the game are a representation of James's inner demons, like guilt and grief. Silent Silent Hill 2 has 6 alternative endings, and the experience of playing through the game feels like reading a highly satisfying psychological horror book. Silent Hill 2 received widespread acclaim on its release and also sold quite well. Within a month of its release, it sold over 1 million copies. The story, narration, theme and tone of the game received universal praise. The game's sound effects and music were also credited to building the spooky and sometimes claustrophobic atmosphere. The only major criticism was aimed at the game's level of difficulty and the character voice acting. The success and popularity of the game led to commissioning of multiple sequels such as Silent Hill 3 and 4 in 2003 and 2004 respectively. A remake of Silent Hill 2 was announced in October 2022.
I said freeze!
Resident Evil 4, 2005. Resident Evil 4 is a survival horror game played from third-person perspective, which till that point was a rare camera angle in the survival horror genre. The player assumes the role of a US special agent sent to rescue the president's daughter from the clutches of a mysterious Spanish cult. The main enemies in the game are violent villagers with weapons, infected with a mind-controlling parasite, but they're capable of working together. There are also genetically mutated enemies taking the form of giant trolls or wicked sea monsters. Resident Evil 4 redefined the third-person shooter category and became a benchmark for future games. Resident Evil 4 received immense critical and commercial acclaim. The cinematics and deep character design were praised. The shooting mechanism of the game created a standard for future third persons to maintain. The soundtrack and voiceover work was said to be deeply appropriate for the game. The PS2 version of the game sold more than 2 million copies worldwide. Various sequels to the game were made. A virtual reality VR version was created in 2021, but was criticized for their censorship of mature content. A remake of Resident Evil 4 is slated to be released in 2023. Shadow of the Colossus, 2005. Shadow of the Colossus is an action-adventure game developed by the famed team of Ico, who were responsible for creating the legendary game Ico in 2001. Shadow of the Colossus is considered to be the spiritual successor of Ico because they share a lot of elements but consist of completely different core gameplay. Shadow of the Colossus is the story of a young boy as he sets out to fight against a group of lofty colossi while in search of his lost love. The game is entirely open world. The player must figure out the point of weakness of each colossus and formulate a battle strategy. Shadow of the Colossus received critical as well as commercial success. It was called the most visually innovative game of the PS2 platform. The game's emotional components as well as soundtrack were deeply praised. It won various industry awards for its storytelling, visuals, and design. A lot of future games as well as artists were influenced by Shadow of the Colossus. It's considered one of the best games ever made across any platform. A remastered version was released in 2011 and an HD version in 2018. Devil May Cry, 2001. Devil May Cry is an action-adventure game that was initially conceived as Resident Evil 4, but later branched off as its own separate game. The game is influenced by the historic poem Divine Comedy by Dante. The game consists of fighting a variety of enemies and solving a variety of puzzles. There's a temporary ability to transform into a magical demon with a lot of increased abilities. A lot of the narration is through the use of pre-rendered as well as engine-generated cutscenes. Devil May Cry did very well critically and commercially. It sold 2 million copies in the United States alone. The game's controls, visuals, and design were heavily praised. The only point of criticism was the game's camera angles. Devil May Cry's arcade elements were considered a great addition to its action-adventure gameplay. The game successfully established a big franchise, whose latest installment was Devil May Cry 5 in 2019. The game also influenced the making of multiple mangas, novels, and even an animated series. Ico, 2001. Ico is a 3D action-adventure platformer video game where the player controls Ico, a boy with horns, from the third-person perspective. The theme of the game is minimalism. Ico, the boy with horns, is believed to bring bad luck, so is sacrificed at a castle. The boy, however, manages to escape and encounters another prisoner of the castle, a young girl called Yorda, whose mother, the queen, is the owner of the castle and wants to use Yorda's body to extend her life. The game chronicles Ico and Yorda's journey toward escape. Ico became widely acclaimed and achieved cult status. However, it didn't do well commercially, selling about 700,000 copies. The level of design in the game, as well as the depth of its gameplay, earned Ico very positive reviews in the gaming community. It also received a variety of industry awards. It influenced generations of games and gamers with its minimalism and great quality of design. A high-definition remaster of the game was sold in 2013. Ico is also the spiritual predecessor of the legendary game Shadow of the Colossus. Final Fantasy X, 2001. Final Fantasy X is the first game in the Final Fantasy series to incorporate 3D elements into its gameplay. It was a very expensive game to develop and had a huge development team. The game chronicles the journey of an athlete, Tidus, in his quest to defeat the monster that destroyed his home city. The game is played in a third-person perspective when played for exploration, but during combat there's a turn-based system, which is a departure from the tradition of the series. There was going to be an online element, but it was later cancelled during the process of production. Final Fantasy X was critically and commercially very successful. The game has sold over 8 million units worldwide. The game's visuals, soundtrack, design, storyline, as well as gameplay all attracted praise. It's been considered one of the greatest games ever made. Final Fantasy X was the first Final Fantasy game to receive a direct sequel called Final Fantasy X2, which was released in 2003. The Final Fantasy franchise has become huge and is one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time. Final Fantasy XVI is slated for release in 2023. Beyond Good and Evil, 2003. Beyond Good and Evil is an action-adventure puzzle game with elements of stealth. The game follows the story of Jade, a young investigative reporter trying to expose the corrupt and twisted aspects of the government, as well as the news of an alien threat. The goal for Jade is to capture photographs and publish them such that the citizens see enough evidence to revolt against the government in protest of its evil activities. There's also the significant involvement of a hovercraft for the activities of traveling as well as racing. Beyond Good and Evil received critical acclaim, but not commercial success. It received praise for its graphics and design, as well as its storyline. Its commercial failure was deemed to have been because of lack of proper marketing. The soundtrack was praised for having a broad appeal. The camera system was the chief point of criticism. Originally planned to be a trilogy, the lukewarm sales of the game initially threatened to spoil that idea, but a sequel to the game, which will be a prequel to the story, has been announced to be under development. Grand Theft Auto 3, 2001. Grand Theft Auto 3 is an open-world action-adventure game. It's the first 3D game in the extremely popular Grand Theft Auto GTA franchise. The game follows the journey of a silent criminal who gets betrayed and is determined to take his revenge in the fictional world of Liberty City by doing various missions for and against a variety of criminal gangs and individuals. The player can also get in trouble with the police based on his or her number of wanted stars. There are also a huge variety of weapons and cars for the player to use. Grand Theft Auto 3 was an enormous hit both critically and commercially. It was the best-selling game of 2001 and sold over 14 million copies. The graphics, design, story and gameplay mechanism were heavily praised. The truly open world and creative nature of the game were also lauded, as was the in-game sound and music. The chief point of criticism of the game was the amount of violence. Grand Theft Auto 3 massively popularized the GTA franchise and led to the creation of an extremely popular sequel, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, in 2002. Burnout 3 Takedown, 2004. Burnout 3 Takedown is the third installment in the immensely popular Burnout series, and it introduces the concept of a takedown, which is to keep slamming into opponents until they crash, as well as the concept of a crash breaker, which grants the player the ability to blow up their vehicle. The game is an embodiment of the concept high risk, high reward. Burnout 3 Takedown has many arcade elements, as it encourages and rewards reckless driving. There's also split-screen multiplayer, apart from conventional multiplayer. Burnout 3 Takedown received both critical and commercial success. The reactions to the takedown and crash breaker system were positive. The dynamics of vehicular combat were praised. The artificial intelligence of the opponent cars was quite adaptive and well commended, as was the depth and addictiveness of gameplay. The game has been called one of the best racing games ever developed. Jak and Daxter, The Precursor Legacy, 2001. Jak and Daxter, The Precursor Legacy is an open-world 3D third-person platform game of the exotic and magical adventures of Jak and Daxter, the latter of whom has been transformed into a fictional creature. The pair has to progress through missions and levels and ultimately save their world from evil forces. The game features stunning large open-world environments to navigate through. Jak and Daxter, The Precursor Legacy was well received upon release, both critically and commercially, selling over 2 million copies. The right and responsive controls of the game have been praised. The graphics, soundtrack, as well as engaging storyline have been lauded. The game is considered to be one of the best platformers of its era and has influenced numerous other games. The game was remastered in 2012. Grand Theft Auto Vice City, 2002. Grand Theft Auto Vice City is a main entry in the enormously popular Grand Theft Auto GTA series, chronicling the rise of the criminal empire of Tommy Vercetti in the fictional location known as Vice City, based on the real-life city of Miami. Grand Theft Auto Vice City is an open 3D action-adventure game that expands on the universe and mechanisms of its predecessor, Grand Theft Auto 3. The game is influenced by various real-life events, as well as thematically influenced by the movies of the 1980s. Player is involved with criminal organizations, as well as law-enforcing ones at different points in the story. Grand Theft Auto Vice City is one of the most influential games ever made, especially for the PS2 platform. The visual elements, design, soundtrack, as well as gripping storyline and addictive gameplay made the game extremely popular. The chief criticism of the game derived from elements of violence and controversy. Vice City was genre-defining and set a benchmark against which future action-adventure titles were to be compared. The game won numerous industry awards and led to development of a prequel as well as sequel. SSX Tricky, 2001. SSX Tricky is a snowboarding video game and part of the popular SSX franchise. The game also falls under the extreme sports genre. Players can choose among various playable characters and win races and competitions, as well as special trick events. There are 4 modes of gameplay, including practice modes and world circuit events. There are also special moves called Uber moves that can be performed. Friendly relations as well as rivalries can also be established among various characters in the game. SSX Tricky received a lot of critical acclaim and modest commercial acclaim, selling slightly under 1 million copies. The voice acting and musicality of the game garnered specific praise. The overall popularity of the game led to the development and release of many sequels in the early 2000s, as well as a reboot in 2012. A spiritual successor to the game called Project Gravity is being developed.
You're gonna be sorry. I'll improve right away.
Bully, 2006. Bully is an open-world 3D action-adventure game that's made by Rockstar Games, the same studio responsible for the Grand Theft Auto franchise. Bully is considered to be spiritually inspired by the GTA series. It chronicles the story of Jimmy, a high school student, as he navigates through the complex social and cultural world of Bulworth Academy. Apart from rising up the social ranks of various stereotypical groups among the students, Jimmy also attends various classes which take the form of increasingly challenging minigames and sets out to stop bullying. Bully received both critical acclaim and commercial success, selling over 1.5 million copies. The 3D setting and design of the world, as well as the gameplay of the game, were widely praised. The chief point of criticism of the game was based on parameters of sexuality and violence. The anti-bullying and pro-LGBT stance of the game was celebrated. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of a remaster in 2008 called Bully Scholarship Edition. A sequel was planned and in development for some time, but was ultimately cancelled. Amplitude, 2003. Amplitude is a musical video game intended as a sequel to the music-based video game Frequency. The player is in control of a ship moving down various colored paths that correspond to specific aspects of songs like vocals or percussion. Amplitude is, at its heart, a musical beat-matching game with different modes of play, including remix, multiplayer, and online. There are 26 unique songs in the game. Amplitude was a critical success, but not that big of a commercial one. The cult popularity of the game led to a successful crowdfunding campaign leading to the release of a reboot Amplitude game in 2016. Amplitude is one of the most unique games on the PS2 platform. Its depth of gameplay attracts a lot of popularity. Criticism was focused on its short original track list and excessive difficulty. Amplitude is noted to have contributed significantly to the musical subgenre of video games. Okami, 2006. Okami is an action-adventure video game that's based on Japanese mythology and folklore, and is set in ancient Japan. Okami tells the story of darkness being defeated and the world being saved due to the efforts of a Japanese goddess who takes the form of a white wolf. The game is inspired by the Legend of Zelda series. The art in the game is very traditionally Japanese, paying homage to the particular style known as ukiyo-e. There's a special mechanism in the game called Celestial Brush, with which the player can draw certain elements on screen to manipulate the environment. Okami received both critical and commercial success. The art, design, and sound components of the game were widely praised. Criticism was focused on the difficulty of the game as well as some minor gameplay elements. The game was the recipient of a lot of industry awards, especially for visuals and design. The definitive edition of the game, an HD remaster, was released in 2017. A spiritual successor of the game called Okamiden was released in 2010. Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, 2004. Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal is a 3D sci-fi platformer game, which is the third installment in the Ratchet & Clank series and the first one to feature elements of multiplayer online play. The game follows the adventures of Ratchet, an alien mechanic, and his robotic sidekick Clank, as they try to save the universe from threatening forces. Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal was a critical and commercial success, selling over 3.2 million copies worldwide. The game was commended for its unique humor and its huge variety of weapons. The higher quality visuals and voiceover work over its predecessor was pointed out. The multiplayer component of the game, featuring up to 8 players, also received praise. The success and popularity of the series led to the development of multiple sequels in the franchise, the last of which was released in 2021. Dragon Quest VIII: Journey of the Cursed King, 2004. Dragon Quest VIII is a role-playing game from the popular Dragon Quest series and the first in the series to be in full 3D. The player is tasked with saving the world from the hands of dark and twisted magicians, all the while uncovering the story of the Cursed King. Battles are turn-based and are now shown from the third-person perspective rather than the first. There's also the introduction of a dynamic called Tension, where players may forego their turn in order to build tension, making the subsequent attack stronger. Dragon Quest VIII received both critical as well as commercial acclaim. The game has sold around 5 million copies worldwide and is the biggest selling PS2 game in Japan. The visuals of the game received positive feedback, as did the simplified gameplay. The design of the game overall, especially the map design, was quite popular. The success and popularity of the game bolstered the ever-popular Dragon Quest franchise, whose latest release was just in December 2022. Gran Turismo 4, 2004. Gran Turismo 4 is a racing video game and the fourth major installment in the extremely popular Gran Turismo franchise. The game features over 700 cars from 80 manufacturers. There are cars in the game from every major era of automobile manufacturing, from classical, vintage cars in the 60s to futuristic concept cars. There was also supposed to be an online component to the game, but that was excluded at the last moment. Gran Turismo 4 did very well both critically and commercially. It's one of the best-selling PS2 games of all time, selling nearly 12 million copies. The realistic handling of the cars and gripping visuals were heavily praised. The chief point of criticism was the unrealistic damage system of the vehicles and how that could be manipulated to cheat in the game. Gran Turismo 4 also won various industry awards for its gameplay and design. The overwhelming success and popularity of the game led to the development of a sequel, Gran Turismo 5, in 2010. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, 2002. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time was released to reboot the successful Prince of Persia series of the 90s. It's an action-adventure game that follows the unnamed Prince of Persia in undoing the damage and destruction caused by an evil vizier. The game also has elements of puzzle platforming and multiple methods of combat. The most salient feature of the game is the prince's ability to turn back time for a few moments, allowing the player to rectify a mistake that had been immediately performed. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time received critical and commercial acclaim. Across all platforms, the game has sold over 14 million copies worldwide. The graphics and design of the game received positive feedback, as did the controls and the ability to reverse time. The chief point of criticism was based on bad camera angles at various times within the game. The game won several industry awards, including many Game of the Year awards. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of a much darker sequel called Prince of Persia: Warrior Within in 2004. A remake of the game is under development as of January 2023. Outrun 2006, Coast to Coast, 2006. Outrun 2006, Coast to Coast is an updated version of the very popular arcade game Outrun 2. It consists of the original Outrun 2 game elements as well as new single-player missions and challenges. There are 15 different cars to choose from, ranging from vintage classics to supercars. There are several game modes apart from the game's career mode, here known as Coast to Coast mode, like a timed mode as well as a knockout mode. There are special moves in the game that allow for power sliding, as well as drifting behind other cars. There's no split-screen multiplayer, but there is an online mode allowing up to 6 players. Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast was a critical and commercial hit. The visuals and gameplay were praised for being smooth and effective. The arcade nature of the game proved popular among gamers and reviewers. The ability to drift long distances was praised, as was the balance between realism and fun. The variety of racing tracks available, as well as the deep unlockable content of the game, generated great feedback overall. Kingdom Hearts, 2002. Kingdom Hearts is an action role-playing game that's the result of collaboration between the Final Fantasy series and the Walt Disney Company. This game resembles the traditional role-playing game in most elements, but also allows for a lot of character customization. Like with the Final Fantasy series, there's a lot of magic involved, and many of the spells are to summon specific Disney characters with their special abilities. The linear plot of the game is told through various cutscenes. Kingdom Hearts received a huge amount of acclaim, both critical and commercial. It's the 10th best-selling PS2 game of all time, having sold almost 6 million copies worldwide. The game's visual elements, design, orchestral soundtrack, as well as depth of gameplay, garnered a lot of positive feedback. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of the Kingdom Hearts franchise, which is expecting a release for mobile platforms in 2023. Soul Calibur 2, 2002. Soul Calibur 2 is a fighting game and the third installment in the weapons-based fighting franchise Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur 2 has many modes of gameplay including arcade, time attack, practice, and survival, both individually and with teams. The game features a roster of characters from across the globe, each with their unique weapons and style. The gameplay is fast-paced and action-packed. The battle system has been described as deep, intricate, and rewarding. The game also has a character creation mode with deep customization. Soul Calibur 2 received a lot of praise critically and did well commercially as well, selling over 3 million copies. The game's combat system was heavily praised. Its refined gameplay and updated graphics received positive feedback as well. The controls and the counterattack system were considered good. It's considered a genre-defining fighting game and has influenced a lot of future games. A high-definition online version of the game was released in 2013. The Soul Calibur franchise is still popular today. SOCOM 2, US Navy SEALs, 2003. SOCOM 2, US Navy SEALs is a third-person tactical shooting game and the much-awaited sequel to the original SOCOM, which became very popular due to its online playing capabilities and sold over 4 million units. The game has 12 missions spread across Albania, Algeria, Brazil, and Russia, where the player is the leader of a team and must solve a variety of military problems through not only combat, but also stealth. The game, like its predecessor, uses the PS2 headset for speech recognition commands offline as well as all online play. SOCOM 2, US Navy SEALs was a hit, both critically and commercially. The game sold over 1 million copies. It garnered all-round praise, not just for the visuals and design, but also the immersiveness and depth of gameplay, especially online. The chief criticism is lack of checkpoints in-game, leading to there being no way to save progress within a particular mission. The availability of many new online maps as well as a wide variety of weapons also drew positive feedback. The popularity and success of the game led to multiple sequels being developed, the latest of which in 2011. Twisted Metal Black, 2001. Twisted Metal Black is a vehicular combat game and a reboot of the famous Twisted Metal series from the 90s. The game involves a contest of automotive demolition with permitted weapons ranging from missiles to nuclear. The player chooses a vehicle as well as an arena and then competes to remain the last person standing. The game is mature in tone and doesn't bear much resemblance to its predecessors, with the exception of certain characters being common. Twisted Metal Black achieved both critical and commercial acclaim, selling over 1 million copies. The openly dark and violent nature of the game generated mostly positive feedback as well as some negativity. The visual effects and design also drew praise. Twisted Metal Black has been attributed to reviving the subgenre of vehicular combat in the early 2000s. The game led to the continuation of the Twisted Metal franchise, whose last game was released in 2012. A TV series based on the franchise is slated for release in 2023. Tony Hawk's Underground, 2003. Tony Hawk's Underground is a skateboarding game and part of the legendary Tony Hawk's franchise of skateboarding games. This game is the first in the franchise to focus on individualistic elements and customizable aspects of gameplay. Earlier Tony Hawk games had their focus on famous real-life skaters, but the story career mode of Tony Hawk's Underground is focused on an up-and-coming skater. The player has an option of sending their real picture over the internet to be able to digitize their real face onto their character. Tony Hawk's Underground was a big hit critically as well as commercially. The game sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone. The visuals, animation, and design received praise, but the lion's share of positive feedback was for the intuitive controls and the game's storyline. Both gamers and reviewers enjoyed the change of pace from previous Tony Hawk games. Critics also lauded the open-world nature of the game. The popularity and success of the game led to the release of a direct sequel in 2004 called Tony Hawk's Underground 2. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution 2002. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution is the fourth installment of the famous Virtua Fighter franchise. The game features a roster of 13 playable characters, each with their unique abilities and styles of fighting. The gameplay is fast and technical, with the player needing both strategy and timing to overcome any situation. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution was quite successful critically and commercially, selling over 1 million units. The high-quality graphics, 3D modeling and animation were praised. The deep and complex combat system was known to be highly rewarding to players who took the time to master it. There's a lot of new customization in the game, as well as a revamped training mode. The game has also been very successful in arcades. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore 2000. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore is a fighting game and the second entry in the popular Dead or Alive series. The game features a series of characters with unique fighting features, ranging from traditional martial combat to unconventional forms of combat. There are arcade, time attack, and survival modes. The game has specific mechanisms for defense and counterattacks, adding an element of strategy and anticipation. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore received both critical acclaim and commercial success. The graphics, cinematics, and presentation of the game were praised. The arcade version of the game was already successful. The console ports were also considered successful. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore also received a lot of industry awards. A remake of the game was launched in 2004. Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil 2001. Klonoa 2 is a platformer-type game and the sequel to the successful game Klonoa, and continues the journey of the whimsical hero. Klonoa 2 has been praised for its unique approach to platforming. You can use his unique ring in order to throw enemies, overcome obstacles, and solve puzzles. Klonoa 2 received a lot of acclaim critically and commercially. The vibrant and fluid visuals as well as mesmerizing sounds of the game received a lot of positive response. The charming story and challenging gameplay had also been praised. It had been favorably compared to other great platformers of its era, like Super Mario and Sonic. The game was also praised for its replayability and its timelessness. Gradius 5 2004. Gradius 5, also known by its alter ego Nemesis, is a side-scrolling shooting game that was released 5 years after its predecessor, Gradius 4. Gradius has always been a favorite arcade game, and its release on the PS2 console was welcomed by gamers. The game served as a good nostalgia trip for people who were playing the same sort of game 10 years ago, but it also did well as a standalone game on its own merits. The game even supports two-player simultaneous plays. Gradius 5 was quite popular upon its release and did moderately well from a commercial standpoint. The level design of the game and its visual upgrades were particularly praised. It's been called one of the best side-scrolling shooters on the entire PS2 platform. The replayability of the game, the depth of its gameplay, and its overall well-roundedness were praised. More Gradius games were released in subsequent years on various platforms.
Oh, Chie-chan!
Take this!
Atta girl!
Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4 2008. Persona 4 is a role-playing video game that follows a group of students and a mysterious TV channel in the town of Inaba, on the outskirts of Mount Fuji. The battles are turn-based and each character has a different persona, with differing strengths and weaknesses. The biggest difference in Persona 4 from its predecessors is that you have the chance to order your party members directly, instead of relying merely on artificial intelligence. The plot of the game is connected to some bizarre murders happening in Inaba, wherein the player must use their powers to fight enemies as well as solve the mystery. Persona 4 opened to critical and commercial acclaim, both in Japan as well as worldwide. The gameplay and design of the game were extremely praised, as was the soundtrack. The graphics of the game were decidedly simple, but the immersiveness of gameplay was commended. The game has earned a lot of praise from the LGBTQ community with regards to handling of sexuality. Persona 4 also won a lot of industry awards and gave birth to a lot of new media like manga and anime, as well as leading to multiple sequels in the Persona series. Katamari Damacy 2004. Katamari Damacy is a third-person puzzle-action video game, following the story of the game's prince who's tasked by his father, the king of all cosmos, to restore the stars and other celestial bodies of the universe after them being accidentally destroyed. The game's objective is to roll a special ball called a Katamari to use it in order to collect and stack objects, ultimately restoring the moon and the stars. Katamari Damacy received critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The unique gameplay mechanics, the colorful graphics, and the eclectic soundtrack received the lion's share of the praise. The game has been described as surreal and quirky. The replayability of Katamari Damacy has also been praised, making it a timeless classic.
Come on, who's the king here, you guys?
Yeah, really, it's me. Me!
Rayman 2 Revolution 2001. Rayman 2 Revolution is a platforming-type video game and is the second installment of the Rayman series. The game is set in a fantasy world where the player takes on the role of the titular Rayman, who's on a quest to save the world from the evil pirate Admiral Razorbeard. The dynamics of the game are similar to the original game, while the graphics have been greatly improved. In addition to a single-player mode, there's also multiplayer that includes a lot of mini-games, making this game quite replayable. Rayman 2 Revolution received both critical acclaim and commercial success. The character design as well as graphical elements received a lot of praise, as did the controls and gameplay. The game also received a lot of industry awards. The only lasting criticism was because of its camera angles. The success and popularity of this game led to the development of several sequels in the future. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 2002. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 is an open-world racing video game and the sixth installment in the famous Need for Speed series. It's the direct sequel of the 1998 game Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit. Players can take the role of either a racer or a police officer, each with their unique set of cars and challenges. The game features a lot of cars from licensed car manufacturers around the world. The game's open-world mode allows the player to explore and race through a lot of areas, including forests and beaches. Multiplayer mode allows racing versus a split screen as well as online play. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 received both critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The graphics as well as the dual nature of gameplay were the focal point of praise. The thrill of the game, especially during police chases, had also been praised. The arcade-style longevity of the game was also commended in retrospect. The success of this game and a series led to multiple sequels, as well as the Need for Speed franchise developing itself into one of the most premier racing game series in the world. Beautiful Joe 2003. Beautiful Joe is a side-scrolling action platformer video game set in a fictional world where the player takes on the role of Joe, a cinema buff who's sucked into a movie and gains superpowers as a result. One unique feature of this game is that the player can slow time down and speed it up in order to strategically defeat enemies as well as solve puzzles. The game also contains highly specialized Japanese art inspired by anime and tokusatsu. The main story of the game is told through various cutscenes which contain a lot of pop culture references. The game also features a special cooperative mode wherein the player can play as Joe's girlfriend. Beautiful Joe received a lot of critical acclaim, but didn't do so well on the business side of things. However, since the game was made on quite a small budget, overall it did modestly well. The game was praised for its gameplay mechanics, artistic style, as well as humor. The level of difficulty of the game drew mixed reactions. All in all, it developed a cult following among gamers and led to the release of multiple sequels. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell 2002. This is a stealth-based action video game and the first installment in what would become the very popular Splinter Cell series and follows the adventures of Sam Fisher, a highly trained member of a fictional battle organization. There's a variety of lethal and non-lethal weapons, and the stealth mechanics of the game require the player to take advantage of various environments and situations. The game takes place across international locations like China, Russia, and Georgia, with several different types of enemies ranging from terrorists to mercenaries. Splinter Cell received both critical acclaim as well as commercial success, selling over 6 million copies. The graphics of the game, especially the beautiful use of lighting, were lauded. The depth of gameplay as well as the immersive soundtrack of the game drew special praise. The game also received a lot of technical industry awards, mostly for the graphics department. The success of the game led to several sequels and spin-offs, the first of which was released in 2004. A remake of this game is currently being developed. Persona 3 2006. Persona 3 is a role-playing video game that tells the story of a high school student who joins a secret organization called SEES in order to fight supernatural enemies called Shadows. The player must navigate the ordinary life of a student, as well as the shadowy world, in order to progress through this game. The concepts of personas are basically manifestations of the player's psyche. Persona 3 received favorable reviews upon launch and also did well commercially. It's been called one of the best role-playing games on the PS2 platform. The well-formulated story and unique gameplay also received a lot of praise. The music and soundtrack have been called an integral part of the gameplay experience. The game's dealing with existential themes including death and the meaning of existence has been lauded. The success of the game led to the development of a lot of spin-off media like manga and anime, as well as future direct and indirect game sequels in the Persona franchise. Ace Combat 04 Shattered Skies, 2001. Ace Combat 04 Shattered Skies is a combat flight simulation game that's set in a world among continuously warring nations. It's the fourth entry in the immensely popular Ace Combat series. The key appeal of this game is its compelling graphics and immersive experience against the backdrop of a huge number of selectable situations, weapons, as well as aircraft. The gameplay uses a mixture of strategic thinking as well as quick reflexes. Ace Combat 04 Shattered Skies did quite well both commercially and critically. The engaging storyline as well as level of immersion drew a lot of positive feedback, as did the graphics and design. The soundtrack of the game, which was a mixture of orchestral and electronic music, was quite celebrated. The game was also nominated for many industry awards. The success and popularity of this game strengthened the Ace Combat franchise, which had its last major release in 2019 and has at least one new game under development. Time Splitters 2, 2002. Time Splitters 2 is a first-person shooter game set in a futuristic world where the player must time travel to different eras while trying to fight against the Time Splitters, a species of aliens trying to destroy and enslave humanity. Both its single-player campaign as well as its multiplayer mode became quite successful. A map editor was also included in the package and became popular. Time Splitters 2 received both critical and commercial acclaim. The smooth graphics and controls were well praised. The replayability and level of immersion of the game gained praise. The humor and references of the game grew popular. The only lasting criticism was directed at lack of support for extensive online play. Overall, Time Splitters 2 became a genre-defining game of its time and one of the most popular first-person shooters on the entire PS2 platform. Medal of Honor Frontline, 2002. Medal of Honor Frontline is a first-person shooter video game that's set during the events of World War II. It's the first game in the Medal of Honor series to not involve the legendary director Steven Spielberg. The game features real-life war scenarios, events, and weapons, and is quite linear in structure. The player also has to fight various historical battles like Normandy and the liberation of Paris. Medal of Honor Frontline received critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The game's graphics were heavily praised, as were its cutscenes and attention to detail. The sound, voice acting, and weapon design received positive feedback. Medal of Honor Frontline was the recipient of a lot of industry awards as well, and further strengthened the position of the Medal of Honor franchise.
Back pressure building and water reclamation system. Immediate technician attention required.
Red Faction, 2001. Red Faction is a first-person shooter game where the player fights in the shoes of a revolutionary group on the planet Mars, called the Red Faction, struggling against the rule of an oppressive corporation. There's a lot of interesting technology in the game that allows players to manipulate the game's environment in real time, enabling players to create their unique paths through levels. Red Faction received a lot of critical praise and commercial success. The graphics of the game and the detailed environment were particularly praised. The sound effects of the game, as well as level of immersion of the audio in particular, were noted. The range and diversity of weapons and vehicles, as well as overall replayability of the game, was lauded. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of multiple sequels in the franchise. Sly 2 Band of Thieves, 2004. Sly 2 Band of Thieves is a platforming-type video game and the second installment in the Sly Cooper series. The player takes control of a raccoon thief named Sly, as well as his allies, a turtle and a hippopotamus. The game focuses on the element of cooperative gameplay while developing on gameplay mechanics from its predecessor. The game also encourages the player to come up with creative solutions. The player also has the option of using sound to be able to distract enemies. Sly 2 Band of Thieves did well both critically and commercially. Its vibrant graphics as well as elements of teamwork were adequately praised, as were the innovative features in gameplay. The chief criticism directed at the game was the ease of difficulty. Overall, it's considered to be one of the best platformers of its generation. The Sly Cooper series subsequently became quite popular with its last release in 2013. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, 2001. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance is an action role-playing game that takes place in the world of Dungeons & Dragons at the fabled city of Baldur's Gate. The player takes the role of one of three characters fighting against various monsters across ruins and dungeons and discovering many treasures along the way. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance received much critical acclaim, as well as a lot of commercial success, selling over 1 million units. The game's immersive graphics and sound design were praised, as was the depth of gameplay and cooperative multiplayer mode. The replayability of the game was also noted. The game also won a lot of industry awards, upsetting a lot of favorites. A sequel to the game was released in 2004. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Chaos Theory, 2005. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is a third-person stealth action-adventure game set in the near future where the player takes the role of Sam Fisher in trying to stop a mysterious organization from causing global conflict. The game features a mixture of strategy, stealth, and puzzle-solving elements. There are a wide variety of weapons to use, as well as hand-to-hand combat. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Chaos Theory was a critical and commercial success, selling over 2.5 million copies. The game's combat mechanics were well praised, as was the sophisticated artificial intelligence. The stealth elements of the game received a lot of praise and became genre-defining. The large variety of weaponry elements attracted a lot of positive attention, as did the puzzle elements of the game. A remastered HD edition of the game was released in 2010. Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening, 2006. Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening is an action-adventure game that serves as the prequel to the original Devil May Cry game. The game is popular for its fast-paced and style-based system of combat. There's a unique mechanic known as the style meter in the game, which rewards the use of flair in one's fighting moves. This game also has multiple endings depending upon the choices one makes during gameplay. Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening received good critical reviews as well as commercial success. The game's graphics, level design, and soundtrack received a lot of positive attention. It was favorably compared to the Prince of Persia series. The game's success led to the continued existence and popularity of the Devil May Cry franchise, as well as to the huge amount of artistic influence on other gaming franchises. Jak 2, 2003. Jak 2 is a third-person action-adventure game that's the second installment in the Jak and Daxter series. The game takes place in a dystopian future wherefrom Jak tries to escape, all the while uncovering the truth about his past. The two most salient features of the game are its open-world environment and its refined combat system. Jak 2 did well both critically and commercially, selling over 2.5 million units. It's been oftentimes called one of the best-looking games on the PS2. The game's characters as well as depth of gameplay were praised. The storyline of the game was considered one of its strongest aspects. A remaster of the game was released in 2012. The franchise took a more mature turn after this particular game. Dark Cloud 2, 2002. Dark Cloud 2 is an action role-playing game that takes place in a time wherein the player must travel through time and rebuild destroyed cities, gather treasures, and fight monsters. The player controls either Max, a young inventor, or Monica, a warrior princess, as the game combines the elements of city building and dungeon dwelling. Dark Cloud 2 performed well both critically and commercially. The graphics of the game, especially its unique cel-shaded art style, was well received, as was the sound. The adventure elements of the game were also lauded, as were its high production values. The game also won a lot of industry awards. Although an official sequel was never released, the game Rogue Galaxy was inspired heavily from this game.
Isn't this romantic?
Kingdom Hearts 2, 2005. Kingdom Hearts 2 is an action role-playing game that's the sequel to the popular game Kingdom Hearts and takes place in a fictional universe that combines elements of the Disney and Final Fantasy franchises. The player takes the role of Sora in the search for his long-lost friends while trying to defeat an evil organization. On his journey, Sora is supported by various Disney and Final Fantasy characters. There are also a lot of side quests and mini-games. Kingdom Hearts 2 opened to a lot of critical acclaim and followed it up with commercial success, selling over 4 million copies. The visuals and soundtrack were given a lot of praise, as were the cutscenes, voice acting, and cinematics. The only lasting criticism was based on camera problems. The game led to the development of a lot of spin-off media merchandise, including toys and manga. An HD remaster was later released. Half-Life 2001. Half-Life is a first-person shooter where the player takes on the role of theoretical physicist Gordon Freeman, who must escape the Black Mesa research facility after an experimental disaster took place while fighting dangerous aliens and military forces. Half-Life is regarded as a genre-defining and revolutionary game, among the best video games ever made. It's achieved cult status among first-person shooter games. The story of the game is told mostly through scripted sequences as opposed to cutscenes. The game also contains multiplayer support for different modes such as individual and team deathmatches. Half-Life achieved overwhelming critical acclaim and commercial success upon release, selling over 9 million copies. The gameplay is fast and full of action, with specific focus on solving puzzles and overcoming obstacles. The interesting storyline of the game also received a lot of praise. The artificial intelligence and adaptability of the opponents in the game were specifically lauded. The popularity and success of the game led to multiple sequels, the first of which, Half-Life 2, was released in 2004. The game also inspired several user-created mods which later developed into their own standalone games. Psychonauts 2005. Psychonauts is a third-person action-adventure video game with platforming elements that follows the adventures of Raz, a young psychic who sneaks into a summer camp in order to gain psychic powers and become a psychonaut. The game centers on Raz's use of his psychic abilities in order to explore the minds of others as he defeats their mental demons. Raz's psychic abilities include telekinesis, invisibility, and levitation, among others. Although Psychonauts received critical acclaim, it didn't do so well commercially. The imaginative world of the game was praised, as was the engrossing story. The game's complex narrative and characteristic humor received positive feedback. Criticism was based on the structuring of the game. The game's lack of commercial success was attributed to failure in marketing. The game's artistic style became exemplary and inspired many games of the future. Although the game failed commercially, the cult popularity of the game led to the development of a sequel, which was released in 2021. Onimusha Warlords, 2001. Onimusha Warlords is an action-adventure video game that puts the player in the role of a samurai warrior as he embarks on a journey to rescue a kidnapped princess. There's a specialized combat system in the game as well as a magic system. The game draws inspiration from the Resident Evil series. It combines puzzle solving with action. The popular game series Devil May Cry was born as direct inspiration from Onimusha Warlords. Onimusha Warlords did well critically and also sold quite well, over 2 million units. It was the first PS2 game to sell over 1 million units. The graphics and audio of the game were heavily praised. The narrative of the game, as well as its smooth flow, was also lauded. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of multiple sequels. Onimusha Warlords is considered one of the most exemplary games on the entire PS2 platform. An HD remastered version was released in 2018.
So, what will you do? I'll be waiting where all begins.
Silent Hill 3, 2003. Silent Hill 3 is a survival horror video game that's the third installment in the famed Silent Hill series and meant as a direct sequel to the original Silent Hill game. The game follows the story of a young woman who finds herself strangely attracted to the mysterious town of Silent Hill after experiencing terrible nightmares. The player controls this young woman as she explores the town, solving puzzles and fighting various monsters. Silent Hill 3 opened to critical and commercial acclaim. The visuals of the game were heavily praised, as was the dark and creepy atmosphere. The deep story of the game, as well as the challenging level of gameplay, also received positive feedback from players. The frightening sound effects also received special mention from critics. A film adaptation of the game was released in 2012. A remastered HD remake of the game was also released in the year 2012. The psychological elements of the game were the focal point of a lot of attention in the media. A number of sequels as well as spin-offs were released in subsequent years. Guilty Gear X2, 2002. Guilty Gear X2 is a two-dimensional fighting game that's the second installment in the Guilty Gear series. The game features a unique and diverse roster of characters, each with their own special ability and style. New attack mechanisms have been introduced, such as the ability to throw your opponent into the air. The ability to cancel your already chosen move and execute a different one has also been introduced. There are 8 different modes of play, including a 2-player mode. Guilty Gear X2 received a lot of critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The graphics of the game received a lot of praise for their level of detail, while the fluidity of animation and sound was also commended. The sheer number of fighting moves available, as well as the ability to do combination moves, received positive feedback. The lack of an online mode was criticized. Overall, Guilty Gear X2 came to be known as one of the best fighting games on the entire PS2 platform. Multiple sequels, updated versions, and spin-offs were released in subsequent years. A manga and trading card version of the game also became quite popular. Soul Calibur 3, 2005. Soul Calibur 3 is a fighting game that's the 4th installment in the Soul Calibur series of fighting games. The story takes place in the year 1590 and follows the journey of the legendary weapon, Soul Calibur. The game features a roster of many characters, each equipped with special weapons and abilities. It's the last Soul Calibur game to have been released on arcades. The main new feature of the game is its extensive character creation system with detailed customization. Soul Calibur 3 achieved both critical acclaim and commercial success. The graphics, animation, and 3D models were praised. The sound effects and music also received positive feedback. The strategic elements of the game were commended, like anticipating opponent moves and performing combinations by stringing together various moves. The lively, quick-paced gameplay was the biggest attraction of the game. The lack of online play was the chief point of criticism. The game also won a lot of industry awards. A sequel, Soul Calibur 4, was released in 2008. There's also a popular collectible card game based on the Soul Calibur series. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Pandora Tomorrow, 2004. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Pandora Tomorrow is a stealth action game that's the second installment in the famous Splinter Cell series. The story follows Sam Fisher, a highly trained government agent, as he tries to stop a terrorist group from releasing a lethal virus into the world. A new feature included in the game is the ability to control multiple characters, as well as a new competitive multiplayer mode. There are also various new gadgets, including the snake camera that allows players to see through walls. The player is encouraged and rewarded for being stealthy, as opposed to having direct confrontation. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Pandora Tomorrow received both critical acclaim and commercial success, selling over 3 million copies. The graphics, visual design, and sound effects received heavy praise. The depth of gameplay and the immersive nature of the game were liked by both critics and players. The multiplayer mode also received positive feedback. The chief criticism was based on the rigid linearity of the campaign. The popularity and success of the game led to multiple sequels in the coming years, the first of which released in 2005. Hitman 2: Silent Assassin, 2002. Hitman 2: Silent Assassin is a stealth action video game and is the second installment in the very popular Hitman series. The player continues the role of Agent 47, a highly trained assassin who works for an international agency from the previous game. The game takes place in multiple international locations like Italy, Russia, and India. At this point in the story, Agent 47 is retired and living a quiet life in Italy until he's blackmailed and pulled back into the dark world of assassinations. New gameplay mechanics of the game includes the use of disguises and the ability to blend into the crowd. Hitman 2: Silent Assassin was a great success both critically and commercially, selling almost 4 million copies. The graphics and the environment were praised as realistic, and the sound was very well tailored to the visuals. Critics generally agreed that the game managed to fix most of the major problems of its predecessor. The level of engagement of the game was the most attractive part of it, according to most players. The success and popularity of the game led to multiple sequels and remasters, the first of which was released in 2004. Suikoden 3, 2002. Suikoden 3 is a role-playing game that's the third installment in the Suikoden series, whose games are based on an ancient Chinese novel. The game takes place in a fictional and fantastical world wherein the player is in control of multiple characters. The story is told from multiple points of view, which makes the narrative complex and vivid. 3 powerful nations are at war, and the player must control characters from all 3 and explore the true causes behind the war. Battles are turn-based, wherein the player can use physical attacks as well as magical powers. The game also has a large roster of recruitable characters, each with their own special abilities. Suikoden 3 was received well both critically and commercially, although it didn't officially release in many regions of the world. The interesting and engaging storyline of the game received a lot of praise, as did the solid development of characters. The graphics and soundtrack were praised, but were not as highlighted as the story. Overall, Suikoden 3 is considered a classic role-playing game on the PS2 platform. Multiple sequels were released, up to Suikoden 5 in 2006. A spiritual successor of the game called Eiyuden Chronicle is set to release in 2023. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, 2005. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition is an arcade-style racing video game that's the third installment in the Midnight Club series. Like other games in the series, the game is focused more on wild and fun driving rather than a realistic experience. The player can choose from a variety of vehicles like motorcycles, sports cars, as well as luxury cars. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition is a result of collaboration between Rockstar Games and Dub Magazine, a well-known automotive magazine in the US. It's the first game in the series to feature licensed vehicles, and also includes an extensive modification system. There's also a multiplayer mode that allows split screen and online play. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition achieved very good critical and commercial success, selling over 1 million copies. Its open-world approach, customization, and racing intensity received a lot of positive feedback. The soundtrack of the game was also lauded for adding to the racing experience. The success and popularity of the game led to some more sequels in the coming years, but as of 2010, there have been no more releases from the franchise. Most racing games become popular due to their realism, and Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition continues to be a celebrated exception. Burnout 2 Point of Impact, 2002. Burnout 2 Point of Impact is a racing game that's the sequel to the very popular racing game Burnout, which instead of realism focuses on wild and aggressive driving. The game has a wide and varied selection of cars to choose from. The main playing mode of the game is called the World Tour, which takes place all across the US through different types of races. There's also a multiplayer option that allows for split screen play, as well as online play individually and with teams. In many game modes, the game encourages the player to use chaos, crashes, and destruction. Burnout 2 Point of Impact received critical acclaim and commercial success. The game's graphics and visual smoothness were praised, as was the high-energy soundtrack. The multiplayer mode and the destructive modes of gameplay received special feedback and were described as addictive. The replayability of the game was also specifically praised. The game's success led to the release of more sequels in the coming years. The Burnout franchise has been favorably compared to the Need for Speed series. Need for Speed Underground, 2003. Need for Speed Underground is a racing game and the 7th installment in the hugely popular Need for Speed series. This game rebooted the entire franchise by shifting the focus to street racing. The key feature of Underground is its comprehensive ability for customization of car parts like engines and tires, as well as the capacity to fine-tune various aspects of performance and handling. There are various modes of races available like sprint, circuit, drift, and drag, among others. The game also has a solid multiplayer mode allowing for split screen as well as competitive online play. There are also extensive ranking systems and points that add to the level of competition. Need for Speed Underground received a great amount of critical and commercial success, selling around 3 million copies for the PS2 and 15 million across all platforms. The graphics, sound, and gameplay received largely positive feedback, as did the handling and customization of cars. The immersive nature of the map and its landmarks and day-night cycles were also praised. The game won a fair number of industry awards. The immense success and popularity of the game strengthened the Need for Speed franchise and led to a direct sequel, Need for Speed Underground 2, released in 2004. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, 2002. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is a stealth-based third-person platform-type video game wherein the player takes on the role of Sly Cooper, a raccoon thief, as he journeys across the globe in search of the Thievius Raccoonus, a book that contains secrets about his family and their history. The game incorporates cel shading and hand-drawn graphics to create a very unique, vibrant, and colorful world. There are also a number of mini-games apart from the main platforming story. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus achieved both critical and commercial success, although initial sales were not that high. The visual design and graphics of the game brought on unanimous praise. The responsiveness of the controls was also lauded. The chief criticism of the game was based on it being too easy and too short. The game has been favorably compared to the Ratchet & Clank series, as well as the Jak and Daxter franchise. The success and popularity of the game led to the creation of the Sly Cooper franchise, which released multiple games in upcoming years. A television series based on the franchise is under development and soon to be released. Number 64, Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones, 2005. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones is an action-adventure game which forms the third and final installment of the famous Prince of Persia: Sands of Time trilogy. The story continues forward from the previous game, Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, and the player once again assumes the role of the unnamed prince who has to defeat the vizier and rescue the princess. The prince has two forms in the game, the normal prince and then the dark prince, who is much more powerful and has the ability to reverse time. Compared to the last games, the prince is much more acrobatic and athletic and can perform various new moves including a quick and flashy speed kill. The theme of the game is much less dark and focuses on the prince's inner battle with himself. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones did very well both critically and commercially, selling over 1 million copies in under a month. The game's visual design, character models, ambiance and soundtrack received positive feedback. Players found the puzzles and platforming elements of the game quite engaging. The responsiveness of controls was also praised. The success of the game led to the reboot of the Prince of Persia franchise in 2008, while also majorly influencing the Assassin's Creed series.
Samanosuke. You shall not meet Nobunaga.
Onimusha 3: Demon Siege, 2004. Onimusha 3: Demon Siege is an action-adventure game and the third installment in the popular Onimusha series. The game is set in 1582 in Japan and follows the adventures of a samurai named Akechi and a French officer named Jacques as they battle supernatural forces to protect the world from destruction. The player can switch between Akechi and Jacques at any point, which is necessary depending on the strategic situation. Akechi yields the Onimusha sword, while Jacques can equip himself with a variety of firearms. To increase its appeal to Western audiences, Jacques has been portrayed by famous French actor Jean Reno, and a large part of the game takes place in Paris. Onimusha 3: Demon Siege received critical and commercial acclaim, selling over 1.5 million copies. The graphics of the game, its cutscenes and music, as well as the intricately detailed environment, received a lot of praise. The boss battles of the game were described as very challenging, but the game's overall difficulty was well balanced. The game's action and puzzle elements, especially the ability to switch characters, was commended and added a lot to the depth of gameplay. The success and popularity of the game spawned multiple sequels in the coming years. An anime series based on the Onimusha franchise is also in the works. We Love Katamari, 2005. We Love Katamari is an action-adventure game and the sequel to the very popular, unique and quirky game Katamari Damacy. The player regains control of the character of the prince who's tasked to build stars by his father, the king of all cosmos. The prince has to roll a special adhesive ball called Katamari in order to collect objects and stack them together. The Katamari can stick to almost any object, thus the player must strategize on how and when to use it. One mode of the game is called Time Attack, wherein the player must collect as many objects as possible within a given time limit. A cooperative mode was also introduced in the game, aside from the normal single-player mode. Wheel of Katamari received both critical acclaim and commercial success like its predecessor. Its unusual but charming visuals, cheerful soundtrack and smooth gameplay received a lot of positive feedback. The game's distinctive humor also drew a lot of praise. Overall, the experimental nature of the game, much like its predecessor, was enjoyed by both critics and players. Many sequels and a remake were produced in the following 10 years, making the Katamari series achieve cult status. Rumble Racing, 2001. Rumble Racing is an off-road racing game inspired by the game NASCAR Rumble, with special focus on vehicle customization and performing stunts. The game has a wide and varied range of cars, trucks and other vehicles, each with their unique handling and characteristics. There are a number of game modes including Grand Prix, Time Trial and Head-to-Head, as well as multiplayer, up to 4 players. The player can perform a large number of aerial stunts to earn points and also pick up power-ups like Nitrous and Shockwave. Rumble Racing did well both critically and commercially. The graphics of the game, the detailed vehicle models and smoothness of play drew a lot of praise. The intuitive controls, car sound effects as well as depth of gameplay garnered positive feedback. Overall, Rumble Racing was described as a crazy experience and a lot of fun to play. It was nominated for several industry awards. Shadow Hearts Covenant, 2004. Shadow Hearts Covenant is a role-playing game that's the second installment in the Shadow Hearts series. The game takes place in an alternative history of Europe in the 20th century, where magical beings and supernatural phenomena truly exist. The player takes the role of Yuri, who along with his magical companions must stop a deity from being summoned and destroying the world. The game has an interesting feature of a morality system, which ultimately determines the outcome in the game. Shadow Hearts Covenant received critical acclaim upon release and did modestly well commercially. The graphics and music of the game were positively received, but what received most praise was the historical nature of the game. The distinctive humor present in the game was also liked by most players. The gameplay mechanics, especially the detailed battle system, also received a lot of praise. Shadow Hearts Covenant is considered one of the best role-playing games on the PS2. Its success led to the development of an indirect sequel in 2005. Champions of Norath, 2004. Champions of Norath is a role-playing game that takes place in the same world as the online game EverQuest. The player must choose from among various classes, each with their unique abilities and weapons, in order to stop the evil necromancer Necrosan from taking over the world. The battles follow a real-time combat system and use physical weapons as well as magical spells. There's also a multiplayer mode allowing players to team up and complete quests. Champions of Norath did well both critically and commercially. The graphics, music and sound effects of the game were deemed impressive. The intricate detailing of the playing environment was praised, as was the character development of both playable and non-playable characters. The chief criticism of the game is based on the difficulty in managing one's inventory, especially in multiplayer. Overall, Champions of Norath is considered one of the standout role-playing games on the PS2 platform. Beautiful Joe 2, 2004. Beautiful Joe 2 is a side-scrolling action game that serves as the sequel to the moderately successful but very popular game Beautiful Joe. Like the original game, the combat system here is very quick-paced, and there are some specific gameplay mechanisms like being able to slow down time or speed it up. There's also a cooperative mode wherein a second player can simultaneously play as Joe's girlfriend Sylvia. Beautiful Joe 2 received great critical acclaim, but modest commercial success, following the footsteps of its predecessor. The game's cel-shaded visual style and artistry have been described as its strongest feature. A chief complaint of the original game was its excessive difficulty, but that's been remedied in this sequel, making Beautiful Joe 2 much better balanced. Despite its modest sales, the small budget of the game meant that it was overall a commercial success. Beautiful Joe 2 received a lot of industry awards for innovation, style, and design. Midnight Club 2, 2003. Midnight Club 2 is an arcade-style racing video game that's the sequel to Midnight Club Street Racing, which was released in 2000. The game focuses on illegal racing in an open-world setting across various locations across the globe. There's a wide variety of vehicles to choose from, including motorcycles, which have been added to the franchise for the first time. There's also scope for extensive customization of one's vehicles. There are various modes of gameplay, including circuit races, lap knockouts, and point-to-point races. There's also multiplayer play, with an online leaderboard. Midnight Club 2 was a critical and commercial success, selling around 1.5 million copies for the PS2. The visuals of the game, the vast selection of vehicles, and the fast-paced gameplay received a lot of positive feedback. The open-world nature of the game, the real-world maps, and the extreme detail were heavily praised. The only significant criticism stemmed from control issues. Overall, Midnight Club 2 remains one of the best racing games on the PS2 platform, having won several industry awards for racing. Aggressive Inline 2002. Aggressive Inline is a skateboarding game that focuses on a particular type of aggressive skateboarding which focuses on tricks and stunts performed on vertical surfaces. The game features a roster of professional skateboarders in an extensive open-world environment. There are various game modes that include freely exploring the city, doing challenges, or competing for timed events. There's a multiplayer mode where players can team up and compete against each other. Aggressive Inline received a lot of critical acclaim and modest commercial success. The open world and smooth gameplay of the game were praised. The controls were also lauded for being quite responsive. Aggressive Inline was considered to be the first proper competitor of the Tony Hawk games. Although the game was inspired by a lot of elements from Tony Hawk, it managed to bring in some innovation that became so popular that they were later included in Tony Hawk games. Overall, Aggressive Inline is one of the best sporting, especially skateboarding experiences on the PS2. The game was nominated for many industry awards and narrowly missed out on some of them. Tekken Tag Tournament 2000. Tekken Tag Tournament is a fighting game that's a spin-off created from the main Tekken franchise. It was first released for arcades and later ported to the PS2. The concept of the game relies on picking a team of 2 characters and fighting another such team of 2 other characters. It's one of the first games to introduce such tag team fighting. Players can switch between their 2 characters at any point during the fight. There are over 20 such characters to choose from, each with their individual attributes. Tekken Tag Tournament received a lot of critical acclaim as well as commercial success, selling almost 3 million copies. The graphics were considered a big improvement over Tekken 3, while delivering the same robust gameplay. The fluid movement of the characters was also praised. The presence of a special bowling minigame called Tekken Bowl became so popular that it was included in most Tekken games. The success and popularity of the game led to a sequel, as well as a remastered HD version more than a decade later in 2011. Disgaea: Hour of Darkness 2003. Disgaea: Hour of Darkness is a tactical role-playing game which is the first installment in the very popular Disgaea franchise. The player takes on the role of a demon prince on his journey to reclaim his rightful throne. The game has quite unique gameplay mechanics. The player is in control of a group of characters on a grid-based map and must use strategy in order to defeat enemies. There's extensive character customization, including leveling them up and learning new skills. Disgaea: Hour of Darkness did very well on both critical and commercial fronts. The visuals of the game were praised, but the chief positive feedback was based on the simultaneous dark and funny narrative of the game, as well as the rewarding gameplay. The game became so impressive and successful that it led to the creation of the entire Disgaea franchise with 5 sequels, several spin-offs, an anime, a manga, and even a novel. The series is relevant to this very day, with the latest installment set to release in 2023. Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction 2005. Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction is a stealth-based action-adventure video game. The player takes on the role of a mercenary in a fictionalized version of North Korea, where there's a civil war taking place. The game takes place in an open-world sandbox environment where the player can minutely explore the geography, as well as get in a wide range of vehicles and use a varied number of weapons. The player has 3 characters to choose from and can switch between them at any time. Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction achieved both critical and commercial success. The open-world nature of the game, as well as its gorgeous graphics and great sound, were heavily praised. The game was favorably compared to the Grand Theft Auto series, although it was noted that there was less linearity and rigidity in its mission structure. The popularity and success of the game led to a sequel, Mercenaries 2: World in Flames, released in 2008. A second sequel was also planned, but ultimately shelved due to closure of the original game's studio. Star Wars: Starfighter 2001. Star Wars Starfighter is a space action game that's set in the Star Wars universe during the events of Episode 1, Phantom Menace. The player assumes the role of different starfighters, each with their unique attributes, and engages in battles from death matches in the air to assaults on the ground. The game features characters from the Star Wars movies, as well as completely original characters. The multiplayer mode of the game became very popular for deathmatches between teams. Star Wars Starfighter received a decent amount of critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The narrative of the game was praised, as was the authentic feeling of being in the Star Wars universe. The graphics were well detailed and the sounds were iconic. The controls were lauded as intuitive and very fun to play with, especially on multiplayer. The balance of the game was also quite well done. Overall, Star Wars Starfighter remains a memorable game on the PS2 platform. A sequel, Star Wars Jedi Starfighter, was released in 2002. A comic book series based on the game was also released. Time Splitters Future Perfect, 2005. Time Splitters Future Perfect is a first-person shooter video game and the third installment in the Time Splitters series. The player assumes the role of Corporal Cortez, a Marine who has to time travel throughout different eras in history in order to collect artifacts that will help him prevent the extinction of humanity. These historical eras range from the 1920s to the extremely distant future, wherein the player must complete a variety of missions that can range from open shootouts to stealth operations. There's also a competitive multiplayer mode as well as a level creator. Time Splitters Future Perfect received critical acclaim and sold modestly well. The fast-paced nature of the game, its graphics and sound, as well as its fluid animations, received positive feedback. The smooth and responsive controls contributed to the gameplay. Special praise was given for the humor of the game, with tongue-in-cheek references to other video games and movies. A sequel was in the process of development soon after, but the studio went bankrupt. However, more than a decade later in 2021, it was finally announced that the much-awaited sequel, Time Splitters 4, was again under development. The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, 2003. The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is a fantasy action-adventure video game based on the movie of the same name directed by Peter Jackson. It was intended not as a remake of the movie, but further exploration of critical scenes of the movie. This game was made with the collaboration of the filmmakers, hence a lot of source material for it was completely original. The main gameplay mechanics of the game include both infantry and cavalry combat, involving various famous characters from the movie including Gandalf and Legolas, among others. The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King did a good job both critically and commercially. The game's visuals and animations drew a lot of praise, as did the iconic sound and music. The controls were deemed to be smooth and responsive. The gameplay and voice acting received particularly positive feedback. The chief criticism of the game stemmed from its bad camera angles, short length, and the ability to save only at the very end of levels. Overall, The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is considered one of the best adaptations of a movie to a game. Manhunt, 2003. Manhunt is a stealth-based action video game that's set in a dark, dystopian world where the player assumes the role of James Cash, a death row inmate who's been given another chance at life by being forced to murder criminal gang members who are in the hunt to pursue him. Cash must use his stealth and strategies in order to escape this predicament. Manhunt is an unusually graphic game, the theme of which is psychological horror. Due to the nature of violence in the game, it was banned in many countries. Manhunt generated polarizing critical views and didn't do that well commercially. A section of critics and gamers were put off by the violence and gore in the game, but others welcomed it as a unique experience in video game history. The dark and gritty atmosphere of the game, its visuals and storyline were praised. The shooting mechanism of the game was the cause of chief criticism. Although it didn't do well financially, Manhunt achieved cult status among gamers enough so that a sequel, Manhunt 2, was released in 2007. Splashdown, 2001. Splashdown is a water-based racing game where the player races in a jet ski across oceans, lakes, seas, and rivers. In the water, buoys act as checkpoints and the player must pass them in the right fashion or incur penalties. Two players can compete against each other via a split screen, but apart from that, there are no proper multiplayer modes. The game also encourages the player to perform various stunts and tricks during gameplay. Splashdown received both critical and commercial acclaim. The physics engine of the game controlling the behavior of water was particularly praised. The robust level design, as well as smooth controls, also received positive feedback. Splashdown has been favorably compared to the popular Wave Race series. The chief point of criticism for the game was the lack of proper multiplayer options. The appeal and success of the game led to the release of a sequel, Splashdown: Rides Gone Wild, in 2003. Star Wars Battlefront 2, 2005. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is both a first and third-person shooter game that serves as the sequel to the original Star Wars Battlefront and is the second game in the Battlefront series. The game is set in the Star Wars universe and features new characters, weapons, and locations compared to the original game. The gameplay is very fast, with players having to engage in both ground missions as well as pilot various iconic Star Wars vehicles. There's a single-player campaign that's set between Episode 3 and 4 of the movies. The game features various multiplayer modes including Conquest, Capture the Flag, and Hero Assault. It allows the player to engage in epic battles across various planets in this universe. Star Wars Battlefront did very well both critically and commercially, selling over 6 million copies. This sequel fixed a lot of the issues with the original game, especially the issue of lag. The detailed graphics and iconic music of the game made it very immersive. The controls were considered responsive both while driving and during combat. The chief criticism of the game stemmed from lack of depth in single player, bad AI performance of enemies, as well as lack of customization. Overall, the game remains a standout on the PS2, especially for its multiplayer aspects. A sequel to the game was released in 2007. Escape from Monkey Island, 2000. Escape from Monkey Island is an adventure game that's the fourth installment in the Monkey Island series and the first to use 3D graphics. The game centers around a pirate named Guybrush Threepwood, who, when returning from his honeymoon with his wife, finds that she's been declared dead and that someone is mysteriously buying up all the land in the Caribbean. The player must guide Guybrush through his adventure to restore normalcy to his life. This is the only game in the Monkey Island series that's not entirely point and click. Escape from Monkey Island received critical acclaim and decent sales. Its visuals, including its detailed and vivid environment, received praise. The narrative of the game was liked, but the biggest attraction of the game was its sense of humor and character development. The chief criticism of the game was the lack of any substantive innovation or improvement over the original game. The controls were also found to be overly complicated. Escape from Monkey Island received a few industry awards for Best Adventure Game. Although the game wasn't greatly successful in terms of sales, its appeal led to a sequel almost a decade later. Killer 7, 2005. Killer 7 is an action-adventure video game that focuses on a group of assassins called Killer 7 that perform assassinations on behalf of the US government and has to uncover the hidden role of Japan in US politics while battling enemies called Heaven Smiles. The player controls various members of the group while navigating a surreal world that includes elements of first-person shooting, puzzle, and adventure. The combat system of the game is very quick-paced, and the player must successfully switch between characters in order to possess the right abilities to fight off a particular enemy. Killer 7 received divided reaction and didn't sell that well. The use of cel-shaded graphics was praised, as was the exaggerated and surreal design of the entire game. The camera work was praised, as were the multiple innovations in the style and theme of the game. The soundtrack of the game was also lauded. However, the controls of the game were criticized, as was the confusing plot. The depiction of sex and violence in the game was also a point of polarization. Although the game didn't sell well, it ultimately achieved cult status, and an HD remaster was released more than a decade later in 2018. Monster Rancher 4, 2003. Monster Rancher 4 is a simulation video game which is the fourth major installment in the cult Monster Rancher series, in which the player breeds and trains ancient creatures called monsters and competes in battles with other monsters. The game lets players create new monsters with unique abilities by inserting CDs into their gaming console. Players are then able to train with and level up their monsters like in a role-playing game. Monster Rancher 4 did well both critically and commercially. It was considered a vast improvement over its predecessor. The bright and colorful character designs and visuals received positive feedback. The game's storyline and humor were also appreciated. The chief criticism of the game was regarding repetitive gameplay and the sheer time consumed in training each monster from scratch, which made the game feel monotonous at times. Monster Rancher 4 has been favorably compared to the Pokemon and Digimon series, although there are some conceptual differences. The success and popularity of the game led to the release of a sequel in 2005. Project Eden, 2001. Project Eden is an action-adventure video game where the player controls a squad of 4 law enforcement officers as they investigate the mysterious disappearance of people by exploring the depths of a futuristic megacity. One player can control all 4 officers, or up to 4 players can control each officer, as different skills are needed to solve various puzzles and devise strategies. It's been called a game of mazes and mysteries. Project Eden received moderate to good reviews and achieved modest commercial success. The game's graphics and sound received praise, as did the puzzle-solving elements. The unique team-based strategies needed in the game added greatly to depth of gameplay. The chief criticism of the game centered on monotony and lack of replay value. Overall, the game is seen as one of the earliest attempts in creating a cooperative multiplayer experience, as well as being one of the first proper cyberpunk games.
Grenade.
Got him! Good shooting, son. Now we have to regroup. Without the Ventura, our forces could be...
Battle Engine Aquila, 2003. Battle Engine Aquila is a sci-fi action game set in a futuristic world where climate change has resulted in the melting of oceans, resulting in the survival of only 2 civilizations, the peaceful and technological Forseti and the hostile Muspel. The player finds himself as a Forseti who must pilot a robot mecha-like structure called the Battle Engine and defeat the Muspel in order to save the civilization. The game features both ground and aerial combat, using a variety of weapons from missiles to lasers. There's also a solid multiplayer, including modes such as Capture the Flag and Deathmatch. Battle Engine Aquila received a good amount of critical acclaim, but didn't sell well at all. The graphics, animation, and environmental details were exquisite and still hold up today. The multiplayer has been the focus of a lot of praise because it increases the replayability of the game substantially. Criticism of the game centered on the short duration of the single-player campaign of the game, as well as heightened difficulty. Overall, despite not selling well, Battle Engine Aquila remains one of the best-looking and well-designed games on the PS2 platform.
All bombs in place, sir.
Dead to Rights, 2002. Dead to Rights is a third-person shooter with elements of martial arts wherein the player assumes the role of Jack Slate, an anti-corruption police officer who has to clear his name after being framed for a crime. The action of the game is very quick, with a special focus on hand-to-hand combat, although there are a variety of weapon options. There's a specific gameplay mechanism called bullet time, wherein the player can slow down time and dodge enemy attacks. Another special mechanism is being able to use a dog at certain points to attack enemies and retrieve objects. Dead to Rights received positive reviews and sold quite well. The game's graphics, character models and cinematics received a lot of praise. The intricate details of the environment and high-level production values received very positive feedback. The chief criticism was aimed at the short length of the game, as well as the unbalanced nature of difficulty. The appeal and success of the game led to the development of multiple sequels, the first of which released in 2005. The game is often cited as a standard example of the neo-noir genre on the PS2. Colin McRae Rally 3, 2002. Colin McRae Rally 3 is a rally racing game that serves as the third installment in the popular Colin McRae Rally series and is based on the World Rally Championship of 2002. The game features a variety of rally cars as well as tracks that have been accurately modelled on reality. The gameplay is extremely fast-paced and the player has to travel as fast as possible, avoiding obstacles while keeping the car under control. The game is noted for its realistic driving physics as well as varied weather conditions. Colin McRae Rally 3 also features an extensive career mode where the player can move up the ranks, win events, and acquire better cars. Colin McRae Rally was successfully both critically and commercially, and it was considered a great improvement over its predecessor in terms of graphics and car handling. The attention to detail, real-world driving, and realistic damage system received a lot of positive feedback. The game's sounds, which were recorded off actual rally cars, received special mention. Criticism of the game was based on its unbalanced difficulty level, as well as lack of new content. Overall, Colin McRae Rally 3 was one of the most successful racing games on the PS2 platform and generated multiple sequels in the coming years. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, 2007. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories is an action role-playing video game that serves as the second installment in the very popular Kingdom Hearts series. It takes place in between the original Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2. The player controls Sora as he's on a quest to unlock his lost memories. The game introduces a card-based battle system and leaves behind the real combat of its predecessor. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories received critical acclaim as well as commercial success. The three-dimensional visuals and character designs were heavily praised. The storyline, music and overall narrative of the game were also commended. The chief point of criticism was the new card-based battle system, which at times could be quite confusing, especially for new players. Thus, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories was quite successful and managed to strengthen the franchise, which would release multiple sequels and remakes in the coming years. Fight Night 2004. Fight Night 2004 is the first installment of the Fight Night series and the spiritual successor to the Knockout King series. It features a roster of some of the best boxers of all times as well as newcomers. There's also a custom boxer creating mode. The gameplay consists of authentic and realistic boxing as well as a unique control system. The latter is named Total Punch Control and allows the player to punch as well as defend using analog sticks instead of pressing buttons. The game also uses advanced motion capture technology to realistically mimic the movements of boxers. There are various modes of gameplay including career mode and legacy mode, the latter of which follows the career of a legendary boxer. Multiplayer support for the game is also strong. Fight Night 2004 did quite well both critically and commercially, selling over 2.5 million units across all platforms. The highly detailed character models, physics system and ringside environment were immensely praised. The Total Punch control system was considered very innovative and a great addition. The only lasting criticism of the game was that it could get slightly repetitive, although the replayability value of the game is high. The success and popularity of the game led to a number of sequels being produced in the coming years. Fight Night 2004 has truly established itself as among the best fighting and boxing games of the PS2 platform.
I hope you enjoy pain. No!
Alias is a dead man. Molov says hunt him down.
Red Faction 2, 2002. Red Faction 2 is a first-person shooter game that's the second entry in the Red Faction series and takes place a couple of years after the original game. Player assumes the role of Alias, a demolitions expert, and members of his squad as they try to overthrow a corrupt and oppressive dictator. An important element of the gameplay is the ability to destroy parts of the environment in order to create new paths or strategies. There's an extensive single-player campaign with missions that range from stealth operations to open attacks. The local multiplayer option includes various modes such as team and individual individual deathmatch. There's also the ability to create bots for various purposes. Red Faction 2 achieved both critical and commercial success. The graphics, visual design, as well as special effects attracted positive feedback. The soundtrack was also deemed to have contributed to the immersiveness of the game. The ability to destroy parts of the environment added a new depth to gameplay. Criticism centered on the game getting repetitive sometimes, as well as the AI behaving erratically. Overall, the success of Red Faction 2 was enough for a sequel, Red Faction Guerrilla, to be released in 2009. Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War, 2004. Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War is a combat flight simulator game and the fifth installment in the very popular Ace Combat series. The player assumes the role of a young pilot and must defend their homeland against various enemy forces. The game features more than 50 licensed real-world aircrafts and various modes of gameplay including campaign, tutorial, and arcade. The player can also issue commands to allied fighters. The campaign has a wide variety of missions from intense aerial combat to attacks on the ground. The game is noted for not having a multiplayer mode of play. There are multiple endings based on the choices the player makes during the game. Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War received a lot of acclaim both critically and commercially, selling over 1 million copies, though less than its predecessor. The graphics of the game, the authenticity of aircraft design and special effects received immense praise. The smoothness and responsiveness of controls were also commended, as was the engaging storyline and sound effects. The main criticism centered on the glaring lack of multiplayer, as well as poor voice acting. Overall, the game wasn't considered revolutionary like its predecessor, but is definitely one of the best flight games on the entire PS2 platform. Its popularity and success led to many sequels in the coming years. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Double Agent, 2006. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Double Agent is an action-adventure stealth game and the fourth installment in the immensely popular Splinter Cell series. The player takes on the role of Sam Fisher, a secret agent, as he tries to successfully infiltrate a terrorist organization. The main feature of this game is its branching storylines. Players take various moral decisions which ultimately affect the timeline and ending of the game. The game encourages the use of stealth and environment, as well as discrete weapons like smoke grenades and tranquilizer guns. The multiplayer mode is quite extensive and competitive. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell did very well both critically and commercially. Critics and players praised the branching storylines of the game, which made it very replayable. The graphics and sound were of top quality, much like its predecessor. The control system was described as very fluid and easy to use. The diverse and robust multiplayer modes of the game were lauded, wherein the players could both play together as well competitively. The game won a large number of industry awards, including Game of the Year and Best Action Game. The huge success of the game led to multiple sequels and remakes in the upcoming years. Disgaea 2: Cursed Memories, 2006. Disgaea 2: Cursed Memories is a tactical role-playing game that's the second installment in the Disgaea series. The game takes place in an alternative world where magical and supernatural entities exist. The player has to defeat a dark and powerful overlord in order to lift the curse on his family. The battle system of the game is quite complex and depends on strategy and positioning. There's also a lot of bonus content, including side quests and special missions. Disgaea 2: Cursed Memories did very well both critically and commercially, much like its predecessor. The vivid and colorful graphics, expert character design, and high-energy soundtrack received a lot of positive feedback. A key feature of the game and the franchise in general is its refreshing humor, which has received a lot of praise. The attention to detail, as well as the high replayability of the game, attracted a lot of critics and players. The success and appeal of the game led to multiple sequels in the future, with the latest Disgaea 7 about to release in 2023. The game won some industry awards as well, particularly for strategy. PSYOPS: The Mindgate Conspiracy, 2004. PSYOPS: The Mindgate Conspiracy is a third-person action-adventure game set in a futuristic world where psychic powers are a reality. The player assumes the role of Nick Scryer, who's on a journey to infiltrate and sabotage a dangerous psychic organization. The gameplay features various psychic powers like telekinesis, pyrokinesis, mind control, and remote viewing, among a few others. These powers are slowly unlocked throughout the game and greatly help the player progress in his or her mission. The player must use these powers in combination of weapons to overcome various obstacles. The PC version of the game is now available for free. PSYOPS: The Mindgate Conspiracy received great critical acclaim and decent commercial success. The detailed graphics, meticulous character design, and ambient sound were immensely praised. The game has been described as very well balanced in difficulty, especially the boss battles. The game has been deemed to have great potential for becoming a franchise, but even after 2 decades, there has been no news of a sequel, despite a good deal of fan demand. LEGO Star Wars 2 The Original Trilogy, 2006. LEGO Star Wars 2 The Original Trilogy is a LEGO-themed action-adventure game and is based on the 3 original Star Wars films. The game is an interesting adaptation of Star Wars where the world and its characters are made up entirely of LEGO bricks. The gameplay is typically based on puzzle solving and a medium amount of action. Players can choose from a variety of popular Star Wars characters, each with their distinct abilities and styles. There's also a cooperative multiplayer where players can solve puzzles and fight enemies together. LEGO Star Wars 2 The Original Trilogy was immensely successful, both critically and commercially, selling over 8 million copies across all platforms. The playful level design of the game has been particularly praised, as has the quality of puzzles. The iconic Star Wars-themed music makes the game very immersive. The most standout feature of the game, as well as the franchise, has been its distinctive humor. The replayability of the game has been commended by both players and critics. Due to the immense success of the game, there have been multiple sequels, with the last one having released in 2022. Maximo: Ghosts to Glory, 2001. Maximo: Ghosts to Glory is an action-adventure game where the player takes on the role of King Maximo, who's been brought back from the dead in order to rescue his queen and kingdom from a ghost army led by his advisor, who betrayed and killed him. The combat system is very fast, utilizing both magic as well as traditional weapons. There are also special as well as combination moves. The game features a huge number and type of enemies against whom Maximo must efficiently strategize. Maximo: Ghosts to Glory received critical acclaim and modest commercial success. The graphics, sound and music were praised to create highly immersive gameplay. The combat system also received positive feedback, especially the challenging boss battles. The main criticism of the game stemmed from it being difficult and even inaccessible to some. The saving system of the game was also criticized for being limited to only certain points. Overall, the game enjoyed a certain degree of success, which led to a sequel, Maximo vs. Army of Zin, in 2003. A further sequel was planned, but eventually cancelled. Maximo: Ghosts to Glory is considered one of the hardest games on the entire PS2 platform. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria, 2006. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria is a role-playing game that serves as the sequel to the very popular game Valkyrie Profile and the second installment in the franchise. The game is set hundreds of years before the original game in a fantastical Nordic world. The player takes on the role of the Valkyrie Silmeria, who dares to doubt the Norse god Odin and is thus cast into the world of mortals in the body of a young princess, Alicia. However, Silmeria's soul still lives on inside Alicia and she must reclaim her place as a Valkyrie. The combat system of the game uses both real-time as well as turn-based elements. There's also customization of characters. The game has multiple endings depending upon the choices the player makes. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria was successful on both fronts, commercial and critical. The beautiful graphical environments as well as the epic soundtrack of the game together create an extremely immersive gameplay experience. The combat system of the game received positive feedback for its design elements. The extensive use of Norse mythology also captured the interest of gamers and critics. The chief criticism of the game stemmed from its excessive difficulty level and cluttered interface. Although the game didn't sell as well as its predecessor, a sequel was produced in 2008. The franchise is still going strong decades later, with its latest release in 2022. Resident Evil Code Veronica, 2001. Resident Evil Code Veronica is a survival horror video game and the fourth main installment in the successful Resident Evil series. The game is set 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2 and follows the story of two siblings on a mysterious island trying to find their parents, while also trying to escape from a virus that turns people into zombies. The player must explore the island while fighting off deadly monsters using items and weapons that they find. The game features a dual-wielding mode, where players can equip more than one weapon at once. The presence of two playable characters is a first for the franchise. Resident Evil Code Veronica received universal acclaim and achieved great sales, selling around 1.5 million copies worldwide. The game's ambiance, look and design received a lot of praise and were compared to movies. The eerie music of the game also received a lot of praise. The story was found to be quite engaging and the depth of gameplay was high, just like other Resident Evil games. The chief criticism of the game arose regarding the responsiveness of controls. An HD remaster was released in 2011, which attempted to fix some of the problems. The immense success and popularity of the game bolstered the franchise and led to multiple sequels and remakes in the future, as late as 2023.
Freeze! You got nowhere to run!
Ready, cowboy?
Yeah. Now! Ah!
The Warriors, 2005. The Warriors is a combat video game based on the 1979 film bearing the same name. The game follows a street gang called the Warriors during the 70s in a crime-infested New York City who have been framed for the murder of a respected rival gang leader and must return home whilst being hunted down by the cops as well as other gangs. The combat system of the game is heavily dependent on tactical elements as well as direct fights and brawls. The player must control various members of the gang and fight off enemies using various weapons, both conventional and unconventional. The plot of the movie has been expanded by the game to provide a greater degree of immersion. There's also a two-player cooperative mode that has grown to be quite popular. The Warriors received immense critical acclaim as well as very good sales. The visual style, greatly influenced by the film, was praised as highly stylized and comic book-like. The gameplay, especially the combat mechanisms, also received a lot of positive feedback. The game has been favorably likened to the Grand Theft Auto series, although there are conceptual differences. Most of the actors of the film did the voice acting in-game, adding to the level of immersion. Also adding to the level of immersion are many of the musical tracks that have been taken from the movie. Overall, The Warriors has been described as one of the very best game adaptations of any movie made. The immense success of the game led to the planning of a spiritual successor, but that didn't ultimately materialize. Marvelous verdict. The PS2 is a legendary console, not because it was the fastest or most powerful among all the consoles at the time, it was neither, but because of its legacy. It had the most number of gaming titles across all consoles and sold over 1.5 billion copies across all games. Even after the release of the PS3 in 2006, developers still kept making games for the PS2 till the end of 2013. There's a sense of childhood and nostalgia that the PS2 signifies and represents. The feeling of the era of the 2000s when the world was a much simpler place and gaming had just begun to be taken seriously. The PS2 in its lifetime generated a tremendous amount of pure fun and joy, not just for gamers and their families, but also for developers. This very fact renders it immortal in the annals of human inventions. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
I was trying to make you a great warrior. You succeeded.